This is the top of Georgia Hostel and Hiking Center. That's where I met up with Paul for our second section hike of the Appalachian Trail. That's Paul playing the dark pieces. His opponent is a through hiker who goes by the trail name of Flash. My name is Daniel. The next morning, Sunday, March 1st, we would leave Paul's car just down the road at Dick's Creek Gap and take my car to the parking lot near Neal's Gap and start our hike. On the way, we would hide a cache of food and fuel to be picked up mid-hike. A hike of this nature requires a lot of preparation. It is an art to carry everything you will require and nothing extra that will add unnecessary weight. One must take what will be required for the worst weather that is likely to be encountered, but you always imagine that the weather you will actually get will look something like this. That doesn't always work out. It had snowed heavily the week before and much of it was still around. We both had added crampon-like devices to attach to our boots. Turned out to be very useful. The first day we hiked the connector trail from the parking lot up to the AT and turned left, trail north. Paul and I are both fairly serious photographers and we're carrying camera equipment, our one deviation from carrying only what is absolutely necessary. Turned out much of the trip the views were nothing but fog. On the first day there was only one overlook where we could see beyond the ridge we were on. We hiked the AT to Wildcat Mountain, where a side trail leads to Whitley Gap Shelter. Since this shelter is over a mile off the trail, it was not full of through hikers. A trail ranger we met late in the day had told us no one was there. A through hiker, Javen, caught up to us and was the only other guest at the shelter that night. Much of the snow melted during the night, but there was still plenty around in places. Eventually we came to trail that was clear of slush and not as muddy as expected. Paul checked out the trail ahead, always mindful of where we might end up camping and where there was water. We stopped for water at Low Gap Shelter. This shelter is within sight of the trail and thus filled with hikers. This was the middle of the day. There were hikers that had already stopped for the day, others that had yet to start, and others, like us, just taking a break. The AT is a very social trail. You meet lots of people and often see the same folks many times. Check out the facilities. This is real luxury in the backcountry. Some backcountry campgrounds have outhouses of some kind, but they are often poorly maintained and sometimes so fragrant you don't want to get close to them. These composting toilets, which are located near the shelters, are nearly odorless and always supplied with wood chips to cover new deposits. We made our way on to Chattahoochee Gap. We had beautiful weather and the trail was relatively easy. We were able to enjoy views of distant ridges that would be hidden in just a few weeks when the trees would leaf out. Blue sky, fairly low winds, mild temps. Doesn't get much better. Paul had a knee giving him some grief. He didn't complain. Joint pain, muscle soreness, and of course blisters are the almost inevitable bane of the hiker. Some people seem to think of backpacking as a camping trip where you have to walk to the campsite. To me, it is a hike so long that you have to camp along the way. If you like camping but not so much hiking, then stick to car or boat camping. Backpacking is all about the hike. Note the white blaze. These mark the trail for all of its nearly 2,200 miles. At Chattahoochee Gap, Jack's Knob Trail branches off to the west. There are signs pointing to water sources all along the trail, but unless you consult a guidebook, you won't know how far it is to the water. In this case, the spring is supposed to be half a mile off the trail. We don't need water here. I love the color of the light late in the day. We still had a way to go before reaching our campsite for the night. Though we had some less than ideal weather on this trip, I couldn't complain. Much worse weather is possible this time of year. A full week of continuous rain is not unusual. Sometimes, even here in the southern Appalachians, there are big snowfalls as late as April. Hikers often dread rocky sections, but I sort of like them. Every step is a decision. Like them or not, these stretches will slow down even the strongest and most agile hikers. We camped the second night at the former site of the Rocky Knob shelter. There was no sign of the former shelter, but a large area suitable for camping was within sight of the trail, and we were the only ones there. The sun was going down as we made camp. It had been a great day of hiking. The next morning, we were back to wet, foggy weather.
It's going to be very rainy by afternoon. Well, like you said, it must be, if they're confident it's going to rain, it must be developing.
We picked up the cache we had hidden under a log just before Unicoi Gap and realized we had more food than we needed. So at the parking lot gave some food bars and chocolate to other hikers while huddled under a signboard kiosk against the rain. We made our way on to a campsite on Rocky Mountain. Camp was set up in light rain and very strong wind which continued all night. If we could have camped off the ridge and out of the wind, we would have, but this was the only level spot for some distance. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air was wet with fog and it was still windy. Here we are on Rocky Mountain, the most miserable night of the trip so far. Rain and wind, and mist, fog, and lots of yucky stuff. We slept in bivy sacks under a light tarp. The tarp is just to block the wind and protect the gear. These bivvies with one pole arching over the head area are very protective, like being in a cocoon, warm and dry, but you can still hear the wind snapping the tarp like a whip and howling through the trees. The weather got drier as we made our way to our last campsite of the trip at Addis Gap. We had not even thought of trying to build a fire at any other camp due to the wet and windy conditions. But by the time we got to Addis Gap, the wind had dried things out enough that we built a fire without much trouble. Then, as we finished eating dinner, a shower came through and extinguished the fire. The next morning, shortly after we broke camp and began hiking the last leg of the trip, it started to rain, and the rain continued all the way to Dix Creek Gap. Hiking in the rain can be a contemplative time. I thought back on the hike. How many times had we heard the call of a pileated woodpecker, or been teased by dark-eyed juncos flitting just a couple of paces ahead of us? Any naturalist relishes finding something they haven't seen before. On Rocky Mountain, we found a fungus that was new to both of us, a calostoma, or stalked puffball. In addition to the many grand views we had enjoyed, there had been countless smaller-scale scenes of natural beauty every step of the way. And then, the hike was over, and just a memory to look back on.